What's up everybody, Gen X Dividend Investor here. In this video I show you a really cool new tool I just made, which estimates how a dividend portfolio would do for someone who wants to live on dividends, but doesn't make enough, so they have to sell some stock as well. And if you appreciate videos like this, then please do me a huge favor and hit the thumbs up button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and click that bell notification. Okay, so in a recent video I did called What I Learned Living on Dividends for 2 Years, I explained why I felt that the 4% retirement rule sucks, aka the guideline that says that you should have a high likelihood of not running out of money in retirement if you sell 4% of your portfolio each year. I actually just found another thing that I don't like about the 4% rule, and that came from someone on my Discord that told me that Bill Bengen, the inventor of the 4% rule, recently was interviewed and he admitted that he didn't follow the 4% rule. In fact, he uses a wealth management company to manage his portfolio, and he likes the fact that they seemingly do what I feel is market timing, i.e. they sell their customer stocks and move into large cash positions and then go back into stocks when things seem better. Bill said he's currently 50% cash and 20% CDs right now. He also said that he has to deal with any income tax implications of when his stocks get sold in his taxable account. And I have a variety of problems with all that. Number one is that the majority of people who try to time the macroeconomic markets and trade stocks tend to do much worse than simply staying in the market. Number two is that I'm not a fan of someone who pushes a strategy but then doesn't even follow that strategy themselves. I mean, it's kind of like if you found out that most of my net worth was in gold and I traded it every day, rather than what I preach, which is buy and hold dividend investing. Anyways, I got a bunch of comments on that video of people who wanted to see how someone who followed a hybrid strategy of having some dividend income, as well as selling some shares, would play out. Like Bulldog08 said, a video on a hybrid approach would be great. Albert also wanted to see one. Tim Boyle said, "Thanks for all the great content. I'm 28 and working on a hybrid approach. Can you go over this?" Corey Wells said, "I would like to see a video on how to collect dividends and sell some to make your portfolio last until you die. I don't want to go broke, but I also don't want to die with a bunch of money in the bank. It's just me and I've worked hard in the mines for 30 years now and I want to enjoy all the money I have made." And Nick said he'd like to see different portfolio comparisons. Now, the idea for this video actually came from a message I got on Instagram from Brian Flanagan who said, "Some of us don't wish to pass on an income fund to the next generation. What would it look like to draw down a fund, say over 30 years? I feel like the math is a little more sophisticated than a percent withdrawal approach as a dividend investor. With the drip turned off, received dividends plus X percentage of the proceeds from the sale of the dividend producing portfolio could be taken out each year. Over time, an increasing portion of the income will come from asset sale versus dividends." Thanks, Brian, that's a great idea. And finally, I'll show you this last comment from that video that came from a big finance YouTuber named Marco Whiteboard Finance. He has around 1 million subs, and he said great insight and wisdom as always. Thanks, Marco. It's fun when us smaller finance YouTubers get some props from the big YouTubers. I'll include a link to Marco's channel in the description of this video. Now, the reason why I like Brian's suggestion was because in reality it's hard to have a large enough portfolio to retire on only dividends, so a hybrid approach of getting some dividends, as well as selling some shares, is probably a more realistic path for most folks. So here's the new spreadsheet tool I made, which I call the Living on a Portfolio Simulator, which I added to be part of my best dividend stock spreadsheet portfolio tracker product. I'll tell you how you can get access to it at the end of this video, if you're so interested. This lets you put in a bunch of information and then it spits out how many years it will take before your portfolio runs out of money. It also lists how things change year over year on the bottom of the spreadsheet. So up top you can put in whatever portfolio value you want to simulate, in this case I put in 500k. Then you can put in whatever average weighted 3-year portfolio dividend CAGR you want, and I put in 7%. Average weighted portfolio dividend CAGR is the average 3-year dividend growth percentages of all your stocks, weighted by how much each of them are in your portfolio. Then you can put in whatever average weighted portfolio starting yield you want, and I put in 4%. If you use my spreadsheet product and you put in your portfolio in the other sections of it, then it would tell you things like what your average weighted yield was or what your portfolio's average weighted dividend CAGR was. Next, you see a field you can ignore called share price, which is just something I use to model things. After that is an input field where you put in how much your stock prices should appreciate each year, and I put in 8%, which seems like a reasonable amount. Then there's an input field for how much your annual expenses are, and I put in 50,000. Obviously, the lower your expenses are, the longer it would take for your portfolio to get to zero, if at all. Then there's an input for annual inflation, and I put in 3.8%, because that's what we've averaged in the US over multiple decades. But if you raised inflation to the 10% it is right now, then you'll see how much faster your portfolio will go down because inflation will raise your expenses. With that out of the way, we see that someone with $50,000 of expenses a year, living at a time of 3.8% inflation, and that has a $500,000 portfolio which appreciates 8% a year and yields 4% in dividends, which have a 7% dividend CAGR, well, this person's portfolio would go to zero in 20 years. Let's look down below so we can see how the values change year over year. So this screenshot is the first 7 years. We see that the portfolio starts at $500,000 and it has a 4% yield, so it makes $20,000 in dividends that year. Since annual expenses are $50,000 and your dividends made $20,000, it means you're still $30,000 short to cover your expenses, which means you sell $30,000 of your portfolio. But your portfolio also appreciates 8% a year, so in this case your ending portfolio value actually went up a bit to $507,600, even though you sold some of it. Then year 2 starts with that ending portfolio amount, and now we see your dividend yield goes down to 3.96%. It went down because we had stock appreciation set at 8%, but dividend growth at 7%. Which means slowly stock prices go up faster than dividends, which thus causes yield to trend down over time. And even though you had to sell some shares in the previous year to cover your expense needs, your dividend growth outpaced that loss and you ended up making slightly more in dividends than the previous year. Okay, now if we look at year 2025, we see that your starting portfolio value is at $518,000, which is higher than the $507,000 from 2 years earlier. At this point, your growth is beating the drag from expenses and inflation. But now your dividend income is $20,173 a year, which is less than it was in 2024. Now let's jump down to around year 20 when it said our portfolio ran out of money. Here we can see that your starting portfolio value in year 16 is $309,000, but then the next year it falls to $251,000, and then the year after that down to $182,000, and then $102,000, and then $8,000, and then zero. So the real killer here is inflation drives up your expenses each year, along with the fact that as you sell stock, your dividend income will get depressed and eventually will go down faster and faster until you crash at zero. Things get bad even faster if you bump that inflation number from 3.8% to 10%. When we do that, the tool tells us that the portfolio runs out of money in 10 years, not 20. Ouch, that's a huge difference. Or to make it even a bit worse, now let's pretend the market just kind of goes sideways, aka lost decades, so let's put stock appreciation at 0%. And when we do that, we see that the portfolio only lasts 9 years. So high inflation and a market going sideways, coupled with too high of expenses, can really kill portfolios. Which is why my retired neighbor that I talked about in my What I Learned video was understandably freaked out enough that he decided to go back to work. I mean, here we are in crazy near-record inflation, coupled with a declining market, and all of that can spell doom to retired folks. Of course, if your dividend income is beyond your expenses, then that will probably protect you in high inflation flat markets. But if you're selling shares too quickly, or if your dividend growth can't beat out inflation over the years, then you start heading down. And remember, it can be okay if your dividend growth loses out to inflation in some years, it just can't keep happening or things get worse faster. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're living on your portfolio and you see inflation shoot up, you should react quickly and then rein in your expenses and/or consider additional income if needed. Let's set things back to the starting amounts where the portfolio dies in 20 years. If we raise your dividend CAGR to 11% from 7%, now we see your portfolio lasts for 24 years. And what happens if we cut our expenses from $50K to $40K? Now that scenario never runs out of money. What happened was that between stock appreciation and dividends, the portfolio has broken free from the gravity of expenses, and as it does, your financial security should grow faster and faster. How about a $300K portfolio with a 7.5% dividend CAGR, a 4% starting yield, a conservative 6% share price increase over time, $40,000 in annual expenses, and 5% inflation? This says it lasts 10 years. Note in this case, CAGR is higher than stock appreciation, so dividend yield trends up. How about we model my dividend portfolio for fun? So I'm at around $2.49 million now. My portfolio's CAGR is 7.32%. My average weighted starting yield is 3.64%. And let's say the market goes sideways, so we'll put in 0% for stock appreciation. And then for fun, let's up expenses to $100,000 a year, which is way more than we need. And let's keep inflation at a crappy 10% a year. In this case, my portfolio would only last for 19 years. But if we lower inflation to a more reasonable yet still high 6%, then my portfolio would never run out. Or now let's say stocks appreciate at 6% a year and inflation is at an even more reasonable 3% a year, but let's bump my spending up to $175,000 a year, and what do we see? Well, my portfolio keeps growing and I never run out of money. So even at $175,000 a year in expenses, it's still smooth sailing. I gotta tell you, it's really fun to put in different values in this tool to get a sense of how your retirement could play out. It's really nice for planning. Of course, as Morgan Housel said, planning is important, but the most important part of every plan is to plan on the plan not going according to plan. Housel is the acclaimed author of The Psychology of Money. I personally am a fan of planning and analysis, but I also recognize that things don't always go to plan. That doesn't mean you shouldn't plan, it just means give yourself margins of safety and then work to become anti-fragile. The more intelligent investing you do now, the more anti-fragile you should become. Mr. Housel has so many brilliant quotes you gotta hear. He said, "Doing well with money has a little to do with how smart you are and a lot to do with how you behave." So that's really true. All you gotta do is not make massive continual mistakes, and if you don't quit the game, you should end up in a great spot. He also said, good investing isn't necessarily about earning the highest returns, because the highest returns tend to be one-off hits that can't be repeated. It's about earning pretty good returns that you can stick with, and which can be repeated for the longest period of time. So true. Another good quote he had is, "All past declines look like an opportunity, all future declines look like a risk." Beautiful. Think about that one for a moment. Or I love this one as well. Use money to gain control over your time, because not having control over your time is such a powerful and universal drag on happiness. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want, pays the highest dividend that exists in finance. And he said, using your money to buy time and options has a lifestyle benefit few luxury goods can compete with. Awesome. And he said, money's greatest intrinsic value, and this can't be overstated, is its ability to give you control over your time. The highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today. He's clearly a very smart man. The reality is that dividends can give you time like no other asset on earth. Literally nothing I've found can grow like quality dividends while being as passive as dividends. Nothing. Which aligns to this quote from Housel, which is, controlling your time is the highest dividend money pays. I love it. Now, my hope for you is that you have other income sources in retirement. Like maybe you have Social Security, or a pension, or maybe you have a side hustle, or maybe you're increasing your income with options. Still, I think you'll find it very valuable to be able to use a tool like mine to model different scenarios for yourself. If you're interested in getting access to my spreadsheet product, then go to patreon.com, search for Gen X Dividend Investor, and then if I have any seats open at the Aristocrat or King tiers, then sign up, and within a few hours I'll email you instructions on how to access my spreadsheet, along with we'll share some private tutorial videos on how to use it. I tend to sell out of seats really quickly, but I also add new seats as I evolve the support level required by my spreadsheet. Like we just finished a new release of the spreadsheet which has this new tool in it, and the overall release makes things more scalable and supportable, so I opened up a bunch of new Aristocrat seats, but they quickly got snagged. So here are the 18 people who just signed up. Thank you Karen L for joining as a Patreon Aristocrat. Thank you Josh H. Thank you JP. Thank you Andre Wa 27. Thank you DRock 19. Thank you Etienne M. Thank you Ace Fresh. Thank you Jeff L. Thank you Michael M. Thank you Adaptations OSRS. Thank you OG Bays. Thank you Sean O. Thank you Trevor. Thank you Eric B. Thank you FFA Blank. Thank you Officer Big Sexy. Thank you Kevin W. And thank you T Park. Aristocrats gain access to my dividend portfolio tracker spreadsheet, which I use in lots of my videos, and they get special access to various private channels on my Discord, including one which lets you watch my videos before I release them publicly on YouTube, as well as lets you vote on which thumbnail I should use, and of course you get more direct access to me. I also want to thank a Patreon king of mine named Dividend Journey, who just ordered these 2 mugs from my Teespring store. I automatically donate 10% of my merch profits to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, one of my favorite charities. Dividend Journey is a military guy who recently started a dividend channel, and I'll include a link to it in the description of this video for you dividend fans to subscribe to. Finally, I urge everyone to join my free Dividend Discord chat server, which has thousands of dividend investors on it from around the world. Regardless of what you do, please hit that thumbs up button, subscribe if you haven't yet, and click that bell notification. Thanks for watching, stay positive, and I'll talk to you again real soon. I am not a financial advisor, and these videos are for entertainment, inspiration, and educational purposes only. Investing of any kind involves risk. I am only sharing my opinion with no guarantee of gains or losses on investments.